Let's talk about one of the most important pieces of data that Sonar delivers to customers, rejection rates.
Yep. Absolutely. So within Sonar, there's a huge breadth of data. And you sometimes hear people say, keep it simple, stupid. This is the epitome of that. Our volume data and our rejection rate data are two of the most vital and key indicators to what's happening to capacity, what's happening to prices, so on and so forth. And they're happening at that point of tender. So what you're getting to see is a few days heads up as pressure changes in the market. So here's an example of a way that we would look at that. We've got our map here where we have two different overlays on there. You can see that there's a color coordination as well as a height coordination. The color coordination is going to be those rejection rates. So the darker the blue, the higher the rejection rates are, the tighter capacity is in that market, the more upward pressure there is on things like price. The height on these given markets is going to be indicative of the volume. So the taller those markets are, the more outbound volume there is. And so I used to use a page very similar to this back in my brokerage days and being able to get an idea as to what's happening in the market. So looking at this, if I was, say, a sales leader for a brokerage or even an asset-based company, what I would be looking at are markets where high rejection rates, so shippers are likely starting to have problems in those markets, as well as how much volume is heading out of that market. Where do I have the most opportunity at? So you would obviously call on taller blue markets, such as these up in Michigan, Grand Rapids, Detroit, are both tall blue markets right now.
Perfect. And so what do we have over here?
Yep. So what we have over here is this is our tree map. Looks really scattered and all over the place. But one of the things that this captures is the change that we see over the course of time. I currently have this set to a weekly, and which is actually how I used to use it. So looking here, for instance, as a broker, if I'm looking at Detroit, Michigan, what that's going to tell me is we've got a 241% increase in rejection rates week over week. What that ultimately tells me is things are tightening up a lot. So as a leader at the company that I'm at, what I would ultimately do is I would say, hey, capacity is tightening up as we move through the week. Let's pre-book as much as possible. Let's try to shrink those margins a little, or let's try to save those margins a little bit. Talk to your customers. Be able to communicate with them, say, hey, things are tightening up. Can you guys, share the freight with me a little bit earlier so I can maybe start working on buying capacity right now while we can? And then, from like a sales perspective, being able to just go out and say, hey, these markets are tightening up. Let's call and see if we can help somebody out. From like a negative standpoint, so that was Detroit, Michigan, that's negative. If we go up here to like North Platte, Nebraska, what we're seeing is a 24% decrease in rejection rates. So things softening up a little bit. It means that capacity is becoming more readily available, say from like a brokerage space in particular. What that tells me is I have a little bit more leverage than I had last week on buying capacity. And then, maybe try to get some more freight from those customers so you can expand those margins, expand those revenues.
Sure, absolutely. And so tender rejection volumes, as they decrease, we know that rates are going to decrease. It's the waterfall theory of freight.
Yep.
And as tender rejections increase and those volumes increase, we're going to see that shift in that dynamic of the demand and the increase of rates across the market, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, so tender rejection data, it's part of the $200 billion in freight spend data that we at Sonar have. It's one of the leading indicators and the most valuable tools for companies to make strategic supply chain decisions.
Yep.
And that's exactly why we all need tender rejection data and be able to apply that to our individual businesses right with Sonar.